So do we need
one of the other things, though, that was related to this drug testing was that on one of the first, if not the very first, officer-involved shooting that we reviewed, it turned out that our recommendation was that the officers involved in fatal shootings at least be drug tested. Because if you're in an accident, APD is indeed drug testing people, but I think it's probably time to continue pushing that or getting a better explanation as to why that's not happening.
If one is true, why not the other?
Why not the other?
Okay.
And I actually maybe should ask you if you have some ideas of how to move forward on this tonight.
I would start with APD and ask them what is their policy and why doesn't it include drug testing. I would start there, because they may have a reason. I don't know what it is.
Should we write them a letter, or what would you like, an informal conversation?
Write it to Major Tyler.
Have her come back up here?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, there is a response from the chief that the drug testing matter was referred to HR, so perhaps the follow-up is to follow up with the chief to find out what response he received from HR as to why.
That was like, what, 8 months ago?
Yes.
I'd rather hear from Major Tyler now.
Chair Fine and members of the board, I would have to research it exactly, but my understanding through the course of my career is to one of the reasons why many agencies or departments had not adopted that practice is because the reason you do a drug test when there's an accident is because clearly there was an action that you didn't intend, whereas in most officer-involved shootings, it's an intentional action that you were taking in the course of your law enforcement duties. So just like any other crash where there could be a suspicion of influence of drugs or alcohol, that's the purpose of drug testing in relation to vehicle crashes, which doesn't also apply to an officer-involved shooting. So I know that's the historical premise of why that's not consistently done, but I would have to research to see if there was actually any other reasoning behind it.
I wonder if other police departments in other cities do that, and if so, why? And if not, why not? You know, if it's the same reason you have. I would start
If we
there.
could check there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
members
Major
of the board.
Tyler.
Yeah, I
Next,
think the
ma'am.
first case we looked at, drugs and alcohol did come up in some people's minds of whether something else was involved. So, okay, but
Well, and
we'll
it might
look.
be what would trigger that. You know, if it doesn't happen in all cases, if it happened in, if there was suspicion, how would it be triggered? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would ask that question too. Okay.
All right, after that, you have in your packet a letter about OPA. It's written to Chief Eden. And this situation with OPA recently has evolved. I think this letter points out that we really appreciate how OPA was set up and what it was intended to do and the process. But for those of us going there, it appears that once in a while it really works exactly like it was meant to work. It's been wonderful in the domestic violence situation, for example. But other meetings, the agenda is just unbelievably crowded. There's just no way that material can get out, that experts are there, the community's involved, that best practices are there, that the best spokespeople are there. It has been falling apart. And for me, and I think for Miriam and Ed, we have great respect for Cara Garcia, who's the person who does the OPA, who's in charge of calling the meetings and leading them. But her agenda gets just crowded with other things that she can't follow the directions or that we originally thought were going to be part of OPA. So what we'd like...
Can we just say that OPA was supposed to be the think tank place?
Right.
And so for people who may be listening or in the audience that don't know this, OPA is supposed to be the think tank, so if the think tank gets bogged down with too many things to think about at once, it becomes dysfunctional. Is that your point?
That's the point. So anyhow, there's a letter pointing this out to Chief Eden, and you have it in your packet. There are 5 different points there that we make, and we'd like them to be able to seriously address the problems with OPA. I think having enough staff is a major issue, that it is an understaffed function. As the letter points out, Judge Garcia is supposed to be part of it, but we have yet to see him. Now, he may be somewhere else in the process, but the real meeting when we get together and talk about issues, he's not there. So anyhow, those are some of the points that we have on here.
Okay.
Read them.
Do
Do you have any
this is a letter.
questions about any of them?
Yeah. Are there any questions about the letter?
I had a question. Do we have, is Damon Martinez still going to be CC'd on this?
City?
No. David Martinez no longer is at, but I would send it to Elizabeth Martinez.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you for catching that. All right. Then after that is the ordinance.
Well, let's make
Oh,
sure
sorry.
that the board passes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
approves
Thank you.
of this letter.
Thank you.
So do we have a motion?
I'd make a motion that we accept this letter to send to Chief Eden about the OPA situation.
There are a couple of typos I found in here, so I'll fix those.
Thank you.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes, thank you. All right. I think I'm going to need Ed to help me on this, but at a recent OPA meeting, there was a lot of discussion about promotion of sergeants and lieutenants and the process. The union came with a lot of comments about this particular HR policy, and the city had a lot to say about where they thought changes were indicated. And there have been now 2 meetings on it, right? Or is it 3 now?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, there was, I don't know if you could consider the first meeting a meeting because it simply was, it was brought up there and then tabled when the city's version of the policy and APOA's version of the policy were presented to us for review. There was subsequently another meeting, and at that meeting, sitting with the city attorneys, an attorney for the APOA, the president of the APOA, and myself, along with the OPA chair, Ms. Garcia. We spent the entire meeting discussing the APOA's position that for promotion, for the chief to have just cause to remove somebody from consideration for promotion, that the officer must have had 200 hours of suspension for use of force within the previous year. That was the standard that the APOA was presenting for the definition of just cause for the chief. And we spent the entire 2 hours discussing that provision. And subsequently, Dr. Brown's comments and considerations were not discussed at that meeting, but I did forward those to the city attorney's office and the APOA and their attorney for them to be considered. Subsequently, the 2 parties had a meeting on their own, and based upon my discussions with the president of the APOA, those discussions were not fruitful, so it appears that the decision is going to be made by the judge as to how that policy is shaped.
And do you expect that to happen on May 8th? Or before?
Chair Fine, this is not in front of Judge Brack. This
Oh, a
is-
different judge.
Yes. This
Oh,
is-
I'm sorry.
And is there, the part that I've pointed out that isn't fleshed out is that they talk about community policing in the policy. They don't really define, well, they do define what it is, but there are no community members that are involved at all in the selection process or in developing the questions that are being used. There's no resource material related to community policing. There is nothing but just the language there, and it's just abandoned, and the policy then goes on talking about everything else. Do you know any way that we can get a place at the table? Because I think the whole policy has been sort of maybe co-opted over the 200 hours of the chief's ability to remove someone from consideration. Are the other issues going to be talked about that we have?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, I was given assurances by Ms. Holtz from the City Attorney's Office that your considerations would be, the points that you made would be considered.
Would we be invited to the meeting where they are considered? Do you know?
That I do not know.
What do you think our next step should be? Do you have an idea?
Chair Fine, Board Member Brown, I think your only outlet is to insist that it come back to OPA for consideration.
The policy comes back to OPA?
Yes.
Okay. Is there someone else would like to speak to that? Yeah.
Ms. Hernandez, do you have an idea you would like to share?
Yes, Chairwoman Fine and members of the board, there are two suggestions that I would have when it comes to your question about how to have input onto that policy. One would be that well, three, I guess. You could do that through the OPA meetings, or you could send a letter to me or to Ms. Holtz with your ideas. The third is that because this is a City of Albuquerque regulation as opposed to a police department standard operating procedure, it goes through a public hearing process. And so this will first go through the resolution process that all of the policies do with the Department of Justice, the APOA, and the monitor. But after that, it will need to go to public hearing. So it will be noticed for public hearing, and then there will be an open meeting where anyone can contribute comments or suggestions, and then those will be considered before a final version is prepared. So those would be a few opportunities to provide that type of input.
Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Jessica.
You're welcome.
All right.
And I'm sorry, one other issue,
Yeah.
to address another question you had raised about when this might be resolved in terms of timing. It's my understanding that right now it's in that time period where we are supposed to the city is supposed to try to resolve objections raised by the APOA, but then it will need to go to the monitor. And then the monitor will have the 15-day period in the settlement agreement to resolve those disagreements. And if he approves the policy, then it will be for the APOA to raise objections with Judge Brack. And then it would be in Judge Brack's court to decide how to rule on those objections. But as far as it may get to Judge Brack, I may be able to get that answer while we're sitting here, but I think that if it's with us right now for resolution, that is a 15-day period. I just don't know where we are in the 15 days. And then it goes back to Dr. Ginger for a 15-day resolution period with him.
So we might write a letter to Ms. Holtz or Ms. Hernandez and copy Dr. Ginger so he knows our position on there too, when that would work. Okay? Okay.
Okay, so then that takes us to the ordinance.